over the summer?
Yeah, it's completely different, and the seasons are beautiful. I mean, the spring and autumn, both of them, and obviously now in the middle of the spring.
I'm so glad to have so many faces join us this morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. Some familiar, some new, which is wonderful. My name is Rehana Nathoo, and I have the great pleasure of moderating today's conversation. We're going to get into lots of very fun topics, but particularly talk about different financial options and structures that are meant to actually support social entrepreneurs where they are. I run a small impact investing consulting company, and we help investors of all kinds figure out how to build impact investing programs. So this conversation is particularly interesting for us because we get to engage with the experts that work on the other side, particularly thinking about how social entrepreneurs can really survive and thrive. So I'm thrilled to be with you here today and very, very excited to introduce my co-panelists who are really going to be imbuing all of us with quite a bit of wisdom over the next hour. Just a quick update that this call will be recorded and then shared and disseminated with those that can't join us today. If you do have a question, if you wouldn't mind putting it in the chat, and I will keep an eagle eye on that chat box and make sure that we integrate your questions into the conversation today, either naturally as we all chat or afterwards at the end. So if you're thinking about a question, we'll definitely reserve the last 10 to 15 minutes to surface some of them. But if you're struck with a query while we're talking, please do feel free to slide it into the chat. And we're unbelievably grateful for everyone carving out about an hour to join us today when we're all enduring a little bit of Zoom fatigue. So thank you for joining us, and please do feel that you can participate. Without further ado, I want to kick off this morning introducing the four incredible brains that are here today, and then we promise to jump immediately into some questions we have about all of the dimensions that affect social entrepreneurs when it comes to financing. So in no particular order, Bobby, I'll ask you to just unmute yourself, introduce yourself, maybe 30 seconds on who you are and what you do before we dig in.
Sure. So my name is Bobby Smith. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I represent the School of Impact, and I'm on a journey to become incredibly curious about how we start to address the world's most challenging problems using venture studio models.
Love that. That must have been like perfectly on time too. It was just timing perfection, Bobby. Thank you. Thank you for that. Petri, you're next on my screen, so over to you.
Hello, my name is Petri Kuusisto. I'm based in Finland and I'm representing Impact Innovation Institute. My background is as an institutional investor from both Finland and Middle East, and I'm focused on impact investing for the last couple of years.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Maya, over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me and for joining us today. My name's Mayawinklestein. I'm the CEO of OpenRoad Alliance. We are a private US-based funder that supports organizations and sectors all over the world.
Wonderful. And last but certainly not least, Paarul.
Thanks, Rehana. My name is Paral Deja. I'm representing Working Capital Innovation Fund. We are a social venture capital fund focused on early stage companies that are innovating within the supply chain, but to help the vulnerable workers.
Wonderful. And those of you that are joining us to whom some of these folks are new, I think you're probably already tipping into a very relevant and salient theme that we hope to sort of surface today around what it means to be doing all of this work in the last year and a half, and particularly when there's no rule book for what we've all endured. So definitely welcome any specific questions in and around the pandemic and what that's meant for social entrepreneurs. That's absolutely the space to talk about it today. Maybe just to level set, because we talk about supporting social enterprises in such a myriad of ways. I might ask each of you to talk a little bit about your definition of entrepreneur support, whether that's actual funding, and if funding, what type, and if it's research and advisory and services, then what type, just to sort of create a bit of a level playing field for us all to talk about which types of capital and support works and which doesn't. And Maya, I think I'll kick off with you if that's okay.
Sure, absolutely. As I mentioned in my introduction, OpenRoad is a private funder, so we provide cash. And that is how we define our support. Specifically, that said, have a slightly different approach than sort of the typical family foundation or high net worth donor, in that we do support all geographies, US and internationally, and all sectors, health, human rights, education, you name it. We say there's actually a pretty common sense bar of doing good in the world. Instead of those sort of traditional silos and portfolio choices, we provide capital exclusively when organizations that are otherwise fully funded, whether that's a for-profit social enterprise with an equity round or a nonprofit receiving a grant, we come in when these organizations encounter unexpected roadblocks. Because the reality is that the world is unpredictable and the social sector is not immune to that. Again, whether you're a agricultural input or a solar company in East Africa, or an inner city educational nonprofit here in the United States. And yet the financing for impact is insufficient and underdeveloped, particularly when it comes to these moments of emergency, crisis, roadblock. Oh, wait, you mean things didn't go exactly as planned as you wrote in the grant application 18 months ago? So that's where we engage. Specifically, we do provide charitable grants and bridge loans. So we also provide multiple types of capital because, again, capital is a multifaceted tool. And so we look at the problem, we see what the appropriate solution is, and go from there.
Wonderful, thank you. And it's such a thoughtful point around timing being half of the battle. That if everything worked according to the business plan, none of us would probably be around doing what we're doing. And so I think such a creative and entrepreneur responsive way of thinking about providing access to cash. Bobby, I feel like you share this timing approach in what stage entrepreneurs are at when you really start to engage and support them. And I think it's a conversation that doesn't really appear in our space because we're all obsessed and fascinated with scale and growth. Could you talk a little bit about the work that the School of Impact does, and including the venture model, and sort of why for you that type of entrepreneurial support is really on the money? No pun intended.
I think that's a great segue into the work. It's one thing to have a tool and have capital ready and available for organizations in the time of need. But what I've noticed in my experience, one is a portfolio manager at Echoing Green, and prior as an entrepreneur myself, is that who gets access to those tools is often the first part of the battle. And the next part of the battle is if they do get access to those tools, oftentimes they aren't as prepared as other groups who traditionally have access to resources, higher access of network points. They have an MBA from, Duke, Stanford, Harvard. And so given and during my time at Echoing Green, what we, identified during my period of time there, in which I was a senior advisor of thought leadership, is that it's not equitable who gets access to certain opportunities and certain resources. And once they get to the table, how do we take in consideration the systemic and historic, oftentimes suppression of entrepreneurship in communities of color, and especially in the United States, amongst women, especially. And so the School of Impact looks to bridge and in one way lower and shift the initial risk of the early stages of venture development by embedding a team, making sure that we're hyper-focused on providing opportunities that are inclusive, especially to women and people of color in the US, and to be able to not only provide capital, team, and support, which is the traditional venture studio model, but also provide the education that's necessary to make sure that they're operating with best standards and at global recognition.
No, I love that. And very, very timely, especially with the confluence of forces we're seeing, at least here in the United States, over the last crazy year and a half. So I'm sure there's a lot more that we're going to dig in on that because it's a point very well made around really pushing back on perceptions of risk as opposed to realized risk and what that actually means. Petri, I think what is so wonderful about your background is you come from an investment world, and yet the Impact Innovation Institute really celebrates research. And I think that is such a cool confluence of things that we need in the space. Can you talk a little bit about how you all support the space? And if you'd like to talk about research, great, but other things are welcome too. It's just the piece that I think is so cool.
Yeah, I think what we've tried to focus is trying to understand why all these good projects are not getting funded, and being myself being on the both sides of the table, I think we understand some of the problems why some of the smaller projects, even though they can be brilliant, but if you are trying to access, say, larger pots of capital, they are not just simply interested in you only because of the size. So some of the problems are very simple one. And our first bigger exercise was to create a new theory to kind of create an extension to Harry Markowitz's modern portfolio theory, which we did, and which we try to create to provide an actionable research so that sustainable investing could happen. And one of the focus areas there is that how do you create this change of mindset, that people who have the money and who are complaining that they don't have enough projects to invest in, and then on the other hand to try to understand the entrepreneurs, young ones who have brilliant ideas, but they have no clue how to access this pot of money. And this is really our focus area. First the theory, now the second project is trying to unwind the problems related to blended finance, and I think this one is very close to the area of social entrepreneurs.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. We're going to come back to this idea of changing systems and changing minds, because I think that's a big part of the conversation today. Paarul, one of the things that I think is so cool about the Working Capital Fund is that you all work within the venture capital ecosystem to try and agitate for some of this change, which is different from what we see, right? We see funds sort of going outside of existing systems. And I think that that's primed to kind of disrupt the way that we think about deploying capital more traditionally. Can you talk a little bit about what that work actually looks like in terms of entrepreneurial support? And you're welcome to weave in challenges. It's not too early to start talking about the things about that are hard.
No, not at all. But I think you started off pretty well. Like the way we think about it is that there's a continuum of capital out there, right? You have philanthropy on one end with all the sort of related support, and then at the very end you have commercial investing. You know, people who are investing in, I won't say the names, but the large companies like WeWork and all, and we sort of fit in the middle in this age of where everybody wants everything. We are hoping that we can find this like golden middle where not only do we have scalable innovations that we are supporting, but they're also bringing a social impact to fore, and that is core to their idea of the technology that they're developing. I mean, in terms of support that we offer, I think the idea is that we are able to bring, of course, capital. Then, my partners, Dan and Ed, when they first started the fund about 4 or 5 years ago, there was really nobody in this field focused on the S part of the social, of the ESG spectrum. And so for them being able to find commercial innovations within this area was very important, right? So I think not only is what we're bringing sort of in the golden middle, but it's also it's not a very common idea within venture funds out there. And to the point that you've made, Bobby, like I really appreciated how you sort of laid out that there has to be a focus on inequity, in particular women and people of color. And I think one of the things the fund has done fantastically well, if we look at our portfolio of companies, almost 50% of them are run by women right now. And not only do we have representation from LGBTQ group, we're just like it's a very diverse set of groups that we've been able to bring together in this niche. So yeah, problems. We'll leave that for another for the next
Smart.
session.
Smart cookie. Paarul, maybe I'll just stay with you for a second, because I think you identified a few characteristics that your portfolio companies have in common, whether it's at the leadership and representation level, or really if it's even at the solution level. Can you share a little bit more about who you think really thrives in your portfolio and why? What is it that these social entrepreneurs have in common that really works for Working Capital Fund, knowing that, you know, there's never a one size fits all model?
Yeah, no, and I mean, we celebrate diversity, so that's, you know, to be sort of counterintuitive if I give you a perfect answer that people would fit into. But I will sort of say that the one thing that we are proud of is that our team of entrepreneurs and founders are very passionate about what they do. They come from experienced backgrounds. They have seen a sort of a lacuna in the places that they are in and are able to now apply that technology in different ways. So for example, there's a company called Phylogen in our portfolio. It's and you know, in this age of COVID where everybody dreams about viruses and germs on the surfaces, this is a company that literally can identify microbiomes on every place, every person, every area. And the idea is that with this microbiome technology, you can unlock not only where things are coming from, the sort of the traceability facts, but also what are sort of the viral loads of certain surfaces, right? So it's a great technology, and what we love about the entrepreneur is that she is truly an expert in the field of microbiome. You know, so Jessica Green, and that I think sort of summarizes the entrepreneurs that we sort of look for in some ways.
I love that. When a lot of the clients that we work with are very new to this space, and so there sort of has to be appropriately tolerance for all kinds of misconceptions around doing this work, and we sort of consider it our job to re-educate on some of those things. And this idea that that social entrepreneurs are not working on really viable business solutions, that they've taken this alternate path in order to do good, but that the do good and the success of the innovation or the solution just cannot coexist together really comes up a lot, no matter how long I think you've been in this space. And so I think it's really great to hear you say, yeah, we are investing in ideas that work with people that work, but we're doing it intentionally. And that's, I think that's the point very well taken. Bobby, were you going to jump in and say something? I didn't mean to.
I had a question, actually, if I could ask a follow-up
question.
Of
course.
And this also maybe leads into some of the work in our belief here. But as you identify, and I would consider you further downstream as a funder, so hopefully we'd be sending you individuals who would be prepared. Do you consider the members of your portfolio who you would identify as most successful or experts, as you just identified? Is that a common thread? Is there a higher level, or do you see a higher or a deeper depth of knowledge with successful social entrepreneurs in their chosen area?
I mean, with the hesitancy to say that you can never put anything in a perfect box, and the idea is to find people who think outside the box, right? So that's why I sort of really hesitate to say that, but I think you're totally right, Bobby. These are people who are either part of the system that they are trying to fix, or they have seen what has happened. So for example, like one of our entrepreneurs, and again, her name is Nora. She runs a company called Kenzen. And what she developed was a wearable patch that workers in mines or really sort of isolated places, when they are at risk of heat stroke, how do you sort of make sure that they're not, in fatal or sort of really egregious accidents? And she's someone who's worked in China for years in factories. Like she knows her space. Recently, we've been talking to an entrepreneur who is himself was at some point homeless, and has come up with an idea on how to make sure that the frontline workers are protected. So yes, the common thread is that there's a passion and there's a learning, but we're definitely excited to see what the School of Impact sends us and who the crop is, because everyone, it's the unknown that always brings a change in the world. So.
Paarul, that's so well said. We need to get you a TED stage or something. That's exactly the right tone. Maya, what about for you? I mean, for recipients of grant capital or bridge financing, what do these folks have in common?
Yeah, there's a few things that they have in common. And I'd say, one of them in terms of sort of our criteria side of what we're looking for and where our capital is most useful. We are, as I just said earlier, intervening in moments where something unexpected has occurred. But we often tell prospective applicants that there's two types of unexpected. There's oops and there's oh my God. And so we focus on the oh my God moments, right? The things that are exogenous, that are totally outside of your control. In this case, you can think of us as the emergency room of finance or impact insurance. Here in the States, there is an insurance company that has a very popular ad campaign. It's mayhem is everywhere, right? So we're sort of, that is the list of the folks that come to us. And it's true. I mean, it's everything from weather events and global pandemics, but really for the last 10 years, with the exception of the last year where everything has been COVID related, it's really been the everyday issues, right? It's funding delays. It's a change in personnel. It's a piece of equipment breaks down that should have been good for 10 years. It's a change in regulation. It's a change in policy. It's whatever it might be. And those really are, exactly as Paarul said, the unexpected. It didn't just start 12 months ago. It's always been with us. It's just when these things happen, it's been accepted, I think, as the necessary cost of doing business, or, oh, well, that's why this is impact or nonprofit, because it's inherently inefficient, right? And we just don't buy that. We don't buy that. To us, that's a sign of market failure. That's not a reflection on the entrepreneur. That's kind of the point, right? Any company that was facing that regulation change is going to have the same issue. And I'll give you a real life example. So you have a nonprofit that went through the 9-month RFP process, got $500,000 from Gates to run a clinical trial in South Africa. Partway through the trial, the government of South Africa changed the regulation. Now they have to go back and redo a part of the trial to be in compliance with the new law. This is going to cost $50,000 more because you got to purchase test strips. You got to fly people back out to collect the blood samples and do the lab processing and all of those things. And if Pfizer is doing a trial at the same time in the same place, they have to do the same thing, but they have access to the capital to do that. The nonprofit that's testing the anti-malarial drug, for example, they can't go back to Gates and ask for another $50,000. They can't go into that budget and move things around and reallocate. And they don't have $50,000 lying around. They can't go to their bank and ask for a line of credit. All of these tools that are really fundamental to just the resilience of any business, regardless of your tax status and regardless of, to Paarul and Bobby's point, your intentionality of why you started in the first place. And that's the other thing that we really look at and why we call ourselves an impact first investor, as opposed to just sort of an impact investor, because we do look for that. It matters. It matters why you started the business. Collateral impact isn't enough for us. Every good business creates jobs. That's what a business is supposed to do. Exxon creates lots of jobs. That doesn't make it an impactful, positive, impactful business. So we do, like Paarul, we definitely look for that proof in the pudding. You got to have proof of your impact. But we also, as an impact first investor, really emphasize that intentionality. And it's really sort of saying, okay, is this, if it is a for-profit model, for example, making sure that that is the means to the ends and not the ends in and of itself.
That's so well said, Maya. And we have so many clients that come and say, intentionality, like impact, is subjective. I will never really know how to find it. That trying to do due diligence in the space is too hard. And I think that the reason why that's such interesting feedback is because there are lots of ways you can signal intentionality. Like every output you want to put out there could speak to intentionality. How you hire, how you treat people, the leave you give them, sexual harassment policies, how much water you use, how much carbon. There's so much that comes into intentionality. And I think when we use the language, people get scared that they have to take on this massive sort of big systemic commitment. Sorry, we're having a massive thunderstorm out here. I apologize. Sounds like jet engines in the back. That's New Orleans for you. But everybody sort of gets scared at the undertaking, and then we break it down apart and find out, oh, actually, you embed these things into your business decision making. They're not as scary as you might think. That they're key to your successful execution of a business. That doesn't always resonate with everybody, but I think some people, once they realize that we're not asking them to sort of change systems the way that Petri's organization is trying to actually pull literature together to change systems, everyone chills out a little bit and realizes, oh, okay.
And another thing that I say when we talk to other donors and investors and they ask us about our due diligence and, well, how do you know intentionality? Like, I'm trying to see into the heart of, what's inside someone. No. We ask them, why did you start this business?
That's right.
And our process is actually very heavy on conversation and very light on paper. Our founder is actually a clinical psychologist. And as she puts it, it's a lot harder to BS to someone's face than on a piece of paper that you then click send.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right.
And you can tell, you get a gut for these things.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Bobby, go for it.
Well, I wanted to follow up on the measurement question. I think that goes back to the training. I think as we even talk about this globally, we're still using the tone as if we accept the excuse that measuring impact is difficult, or measuring or your intent. So I'm just a little past that point. I'm saying, let's just start to make the conversation and the education of social impact ubiquitous. You probably would have seen how to measure impact, how to start to quantify this, how to start to, put data points here or there. And it's happening in the elite universities and at the upper levels now, that social entrepreneurship and social impact education as an academic framework, now 10 years running in circles, in peer-reviewed circles, as that starts to become a more formulaic way of actually teaching people. When you do get someone who possibly was homeless, and I'll give you a better example. We're working with a group in New Jersey right now that's trying to lead the way on plant-based modifications. And they're also leading the way in thought leadership around equal access to cannabis industry as the legislation changes, because you're incarcerating people, or you've incarcerated millions of people for something that now, all of a sudden it's legal, it's fine, and we're able to make money on it. And we're still arresting usually Black and brown men for what most states in America are making millions of dollars in tax revenue. And so the idea is, well, how do we create a venture studio with the support of the New Jersey legislation to empower formerly incarcerated individuals to have the education to learn how to start their own business within the cannabis space and profit in some type of reparations, or I just call it justice, because that is what capital should, in my opinion, ultimately, especially at the early stages, it's when you're talking about you're an impact investor, there's no bigger impact than justice. And so that's where we are in conversation.
Bobby, let me stay with you for a second, because I think what is so unique about the work that you do is that, yes, there's direct support to people that are incubating really cool and impactful ideas. But then there's also, by nature of where you are across the value chain, a ton of education you need to do to the space. We talked about risk earlier and pushing back on perceptions of early stage entrepreneurial risk in the social sector. You've made a really compelling point about if our regulatory system is advancing, then the way that we incarcerate people has to match that. State can't make millions of dollars off of the people that are jailed for trying to do the same thing. So how does education, I know I'm asking a big question, but how does education, either of myth or conception or directly or indirectly, how does that play into the work that you do? Is it an intentional program, or is it just a thing you have to do the work that you have to do? How does it show up?
Broadly, I'd say that education, using just clinical psychology, as we as a society start to shift what we believe is our biases and who has right to certain privilege access points, and we start to see more women and people of color adopted on boards, that happens through education, that happens through awareness, right? And so part of the work that I do is simply these kinds of opportunities, right? Get up, talk about the problems, talk about opportunities to fix them, make people aware of the issue so that they can take it upon themselves to do further research and decide how they will enact change within their organization. That's A. B, we actually partner with universities. We're working to close our first university partnership with Extranado University in Colombia. partnering to develop not only a core curriculum around social impact education and accounting, because they have great accounting partners in Colombia, and having the accounting firms actually, hey, you could have a career with purpose, right? Not everyone needs to be an entrepreneur. The social impact isn't only created by entrepreneurs, right? And so part of that is being able to create entrepreneurs who hold the core concepts of Catalyst 2030 in their heart, and then shift Milton Friedman's posit on the maximization of profit is the core responsibility of the firm. I think Petri can speak to that advancement in capital theory a little better than me. So.
No, perfect segue, Bobby. Perfect. A friendly reminder to those in the crowd that questions are welcome. So feel free to throw them into the chat. We'll leave time for them. Petri, I think Bobby was in my brain, which is great because I think that underwriting a lot of this is how we talk about the theory behind this work, which is a complicated world in and of itself. And so I would love to hear, I think you're on the front lines of trying to change the paradigm around what it means to research this work. I would love to hear about what that actually looks like. I'm under no illusion that it's complex, but what happens if we change sort of our systemic impression of what capital is meant to do and then how we deploy it?
Yeah, I've been loving these when intentionality has been mentioned so many times, because that's in the core starting point of our a new framework or theory, whichever way one wants to call it. And the intentionality should answer to the question that, is there something you care about with your money? And this is very much different thing than just trying to maximize your financial wealth accumulation side. So some people call that this is kind of a, you have two different directions where you are pulling your capital. I don't think so. I mean, you should care about the outcome, and the outcome is not only piling up your money. The outcome is also, you know, if you care about something, that's where the money should be focused on. And that's, you know, all these social entrepreneurs, they usually have already chosen the area which they care about, and now we should find ways how to match these you know, well thought outcomes, what the money should generate, and then the need, the ones who need the money. And obviously on the way you need to ruin some of the old quantitative statistical measures what the investors are loaded with, and compensate them with much longer term thinking and thinking about uncertainties, rather than the concept of risk is a very stupid simplistic mathematical number which has already proven to be wrong big time, at least in once a decade, and people still believe in those numbers, and you know, forecasting has already proven that if you try to forecast how the GDP is growing, or how the profits of the companies are growing in the short term run, but most of the true risk is happening through the systemic changes, and if you get that thing wrong, you are ruined. And that's a big area and a big need for the change of mindset which should be happening, and it starts always by defining your intentionality. And intentionality is not a standardized process. This is something what everybody needs to think about themselves. Is there something we care about? I mean, the question is not more complex than that. The solutions can be complex, but the questions are simple, and they can be treated in a simple way.
Can I just follow up on what Petri said there around risk, because I think it is so crucial, and it's something that we have also really taken a deep look at OpenRoad. One of the way to think about our portfolio, if you sort of look at, you know, we've done over 300 deals in 10 years, over $50 million in sort of emergency financing across grants and loans, and every single grant or loan we make you could say is a risk realized, right? Something's gone wrong. Like literally a risk has been realized and that's why they now need capital. What is fascinating to me in the impact space, whether you're on the grant end of the spectrum, as Paarul was deciding it, or on the VC end of the spectrum, in the impact space, if you do have that intentionality for impact, what we've found is that risk is exactly like you said, it's a relative term, and it's so poorly understood in the sector, to just as you were describing it. And it's misapplied, I think, in the impact investing space completely, because it's used as the way it's traditionally used in the finance market, which is, what is the risk I'm going to lose my money? It's financial risk. Financial risk is not the only risk out there. There's a whole bunch of risks out there. There's reputational risk, there's legal risk, there's compliance risk, there's tax risk. But there's also, and I argue it's the one least understood, the least looked at, and actually the most important to what we're trying to do is risk to impact. So if you're an investor, I like, ask yourself the question, there is no such thing as zero risk along any spectrum. So when push comes to shove, what would I rather lose? Would I rather lose money or would I rather lose impact? And your answer to that one question is going to tell you what your intentionality truly is. Because push comes to shove, something is going to happen at some point. And if we're not asking what's going to keep me from achieving impact, we've already lost the game. And that may or may not be in line with what is going to preserve my capital or earn me capital.
And I think you touched a very critical point also, which is pinpointing to the time horizon. I mean, now what the impact investing era is trying to focus on is reporting. GIIN is saying that if you are making an impactful investment, it needs to be measurable. I think it's completely wrong, because how do you measure the change in the biodiversity? But still, you can have a very clear impact you are willing to affect on the biodiversity. It may be very difficult to measure, but that is a complete bullshit excuse for investors for not doing it. Yes. If you cannot measure it, or hiding behind, we have this fiduciary duty which is telling us to maximize our wealth. That's the second bullshit mistake.
Well said, Petri. I love the word. Go ahead, Bobby. I was just going to say that Petri and Maya have brought up like a very good question around risk. And it was a question actually that I would love for you to answer as well. Like, how do you think about impact, or not even impact, like any action that you take has a lot of externalities. How do you guys think about, these sometimes opposing externalities that could potentially change the outcome of your decision? So I'm just curious to hear how different organizations handle that. We struggle a lot with this one.
Yeah, I'll give it quick. Go ahead, Bobby.
I just wanted to respond to your comment, actually. I was waiting for a while. I love what you said about risk. I would add to the beginning of that, there's another type of risk too. So investors also need to be educated on how to see through their unconscious bias when they're viewing applicants who they think are more risky, and to be educated on how to take more risk. And so recently I was working, we were working privately with NASDAQ and JP Morgan, and we were actually thinking through how do we start to reduce the risk of investors and make this more systematized, how like affect the system. And so we started to talk to universities who are an institutional investor in the US about how can they start to take more of an active management approach of their alternative segment of their endowment, which is their controllable investable yield, to then go and say, well, could you add a reporting quality? This is to Patrice's question around reporting. Everything is reporting now. Could you add a reporting quality that says, Well, how many women did you make fund managers out of this particular fund? Well, how many people of color did your fund manager then go on to invest in? And so this is where the conversation, even internationally, but more so in the US, you're seeing major funds, CalPERNs, I mean, billions of dollars they just withdrew from their external investors because they couldn't meet their measurement requirement for diversity and inclusion. When it starts to cost the financial institution billions of dollars in investable capital, you will start to see a change dramatically in who is more risk tolerant than the other.
I completely agree, and just I'll respond to all. So Paarul, your externality question, risk and bias and measurement, for me, they are all intertwined. I'm actually giving another talk next week for peak grant making on how risk management can be used as a framework and a lens for looking at implicit bias and equity, because it is, and that's one of the fundamental things that is confused about the word risk. Is that there's actually two definitions. There's risk, the noun, a risk, which is basically uncertainty. You'll break your leg. There will be a global pandemic. It's objective things that happen or don't happen, whether you want them to happen or not. It's just life. To risk, the verb, is everything you just were talking about, Bobby, right? It's how do we judge the possibility of those events happening? And where are we placing our emphasis? And that is where implicit bias lives. When you say something is too risky to invest in, there's all kinds of things to unpack in that. There's what we were talking earlier with Petri about in terms of, is it too risky financially or too risky from impact? Is it too risky from an opportunity cost? You know, we can't afford not to do it. All of those kinds of statements are statements about risk and risk tolerance, and risk tolerance is based on values. It's based on what you're trying to do. It's based on what your goals are, and it's based on what you think is right. Oh gosh, you know, it's too risky to give this $1 million grant to this tiny, locally indigenous-led organization. They don't know how to manage the money, right? We might not say that full sentence, but that's what we mean. And the bias in that sentence is I think pretty obvious, right? So that is, it's all there. And I think the externality piece, to your point, Paarul, yes, absolutely. You know, it is a big challenge. And I think for us, we certainly try to take a traditional risk management framework to it, right? So you got to identify your risks, then you prioritize them. What is likely to happen, and if it happens, what's going to be the most harmful? Those are really the only things you need to worry about. And from that, what can we mitigate? You mitigate what you can mitigate. And I love the ideas you gave, Bobby, around, you know, yes, some of those things you talked about are actually, could be mitigation tools from a risk framework perspective. And for the things you can't mitigate, you contingency plan, right? And this is where it's VCs always have dry powder. That's for a reason. You know, there are all kinds of tools and techniques, from financial hedging to just providing technical assistance, send them to the impact school. So, you know, ensure that they'll be able to get to that next round of fundraising, right? Whatever it is, those are the things you can look at. And all of this, I think also, right, it also comes full circle to the measurement piece, and particularly in measuring impact and metrics and quantitative versus quantitative and log frames and all of these things we have nowadays. Which I'm not opposed to. You know, I think they can be very useful in the right setting, but I think they're only useful if, again, there's a fundamental understanding of the difference between performance and success. And I love to illustrate this. Again, go to the regular financial markets. If you invest in a fund and you expect 9% return, but you get 7% return, that's considered a failure. If you invest in a fund that you expect 5% return and you get 7% return, that's considered a huge success. Now, the performance was exactly the same. Success is a subjective indicator. Performance can be objective. So measuring performance objectively, what has happened, how many bed nets distributed, this or that, that's fine, but we shouldn't confuse it with success. And if we ever want to make statements about return on investment from a success versus failure standpoint as an investor, particularly when it comes to impact, We need to be really honest with ourselves and with everybody else that this is based on expectations, and ultimately that's a subjective measure and not necessarily actually a reflection of the folks we've invested in. That's a reflection on us.
We just have 3 minutes left, and we actually have quite a few questions that came into the chat. So I will do my very, very best to summarize them together. The first question for whoever wants to take it is a two-parter. What is the value of particularly having flexible financing? And flexible financing, meaning capital you can deploy across the value chain depending on entrepreneur size, but also flexible financing in the types of tools that you use. And the second part of that question is, if we moved closer and closer towards pooling capital, so blended capital or blended finance at a larger scale, do we increase flexibility? So I'll leave that open for whoever wants to take it, because I think everybody here has something that they could add into this. But what is the value of flexible financing, and then what sort of scale do we create once we're able to start pooling flexible financing together?
Yeah, I mean, I can go for the first one, partly because I think, again, the way we think about different sources of capital is that you have philanthropy on one end and then commercial sort of investing on the other end. And so to the extent that each one of these individual pieces is important, because we are addressing a different part of the ecosystem, right? So the question, I mean, the answer is yes. Flexibility of funding is required to make a systemic change and allow for whatever the ideas are to grow from its nascent stage to what, the work that Bobby is doing, making sure what Maya is doing, and even before that, what Petri is doing, and then it sort of comes to us, right? So I think of it as a continuum. It definitely helps to be able to allocate these different resources to whoever is the entrepreneur starting out. In terms of second question or the second part, I will let one of the fellow panelists sort of jump in.
Petri, maybe we'll go to you, and then Bobby and Maya, feel free to jump in and offer some thought.
I think pooling is very much neglected area because quite many of if I look at the Catalyst 2030 membership list, there are quite many relatively tiny organizations and who all try to do their funding by themselves. And most likely the predicted success rate would be much higher if there would be much more pooling around these exercises, and it's something what Paarul earlier was pointing out with externalities. Trying to manage externalities, you need stakeholder dialogue, and stakeholder dialogue is close to collaboration, and I think pooling is collaboration. And once you have that on the table, you have a multitude of instruments available, which is providing you the flexible capital, what you can then import to your projects. Gosh,
love that. Wish I had written that down. Bobby, go for it.
I mean, he's saying it in a different language, but so our philosophy is that what's missing in the ecosystem are social impact clusters. And from an academic framework, clustering is bringing a body of resources with an actionable framework together with an intent. And our intent is to support the early stage by partnering with universities who can help us create the content and curriculum. It's not just Bobby Smith thinking, it's like, hopefully we're partnering with as many universities across North and South America to have buy-in on what best practices look like, but we're also bringing into the cluster the ability to have early financiers and just talent available. And so clustering from an academic sense is by far the best method of the de-risking innovation, social innovation, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, love that, Bobby. I love that. Maya, we'll give you the final word on this hairy but amazing topic of collaboration and partnership and de-risking. What does the flexibility that's so key to your model, what does it mean?
I think, for us, we think about flexibility. Flexibility is not defined for us in what we provide, but in how we do it. And I think that's a key thing to take into account because, you're right, Paarul, we sit on different parts of this spectrum. But I think, again, sometimes we confuse that, flexibility is for those early stage risk takers. No, that's not flexibility. Flexibility isn't what type of product you're providing, it's how you're providing it. So how are you structuring your application? Are you requiring it to be in English, or are you allowing it to be in multiple languages? How are you structuring your terms? Is it the exact same terms, take it or leave it for every deal? Or are you customizing those based on the person sitting in front of you and their situation? Even in terms of what we take as an investor, we like to say, you know, we have an external loan fund, we have investors, we provide them with financial returns. It's a traditional, you know, senior debt, subordinated debt cluster, but we say, okay, yeah, you're going to earn a return. Here's how much money you're going to make off of this. And here's all of the appropriate things we're doing to hedge and have risk loss reserves and, you know, equity stacks and everything to ensure that. But when we have a choice as a lender, we're going to let value accrue to the entrepreneur, because the reality is an extra 100 basis points in the pocket of our investors doesn't mean anything to them. But 100 basis points in the pocket of our borrowers is huge. So that for us, that's flexibility. It's how you do it, not what you do. And you can do that. You can customize as a VC or as an angel investor or anywhere in between. So it's not the what, it's the how.
I love that, Maya, and actually perfectly full circle to I think the thing that united all of us here on the spotlight screen, but absolutely everybody in this conversation, which is coming back to this point of intentionality. I mean, if the goal was just to develop financial upside, I don't know that everybody would be toiling the way that they are. And so it's a helpful reminder that it is capital deployed for a purpose and not the other way around. I cannot believe that an hour and 5 minutes flew by. I feel like we were just scratching the surface. Gratitude to everybody who joined us for going a little bit over, and extreme gratitude, Bobby, Petri, Maya, and Paarul, for all of your wisdom and time today, giving us a sneak peek into the very, very important work you do every single day. Thank you. Thank you. For folks that are part of Change Week, it's our understanding that this conversation is recorded and will be available for anyone who missed it. And thank you all. Hope everybody has a wonderful week. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.